I'm Rachel. Welcome to my channel. Today I have a video for you all about houseplants that are very easy to take care of for beginners. I have a few plants that a lot of people recommend for beginners that I'm not recommending just because either they need extra different special kind of soil, or for me, I've had problems with pests, or they just haven't performed as well as people say they will. So I'm showing you a lot of plants that I actually had a lot of success with when I was a new plant person. So all of these plants can take a real beating. So I have overwatered these plants, I have underwatered these plants, and they have survived. And they're all thriving now. Now that I have learned, they're all thriving. And that's really due to not overwatering, of course. So I wanted to show you all these plants because one, they don't need special soil. Two, they don't need to be repotted very much at all. You could go years without repotting like all these plants. And three, a lot of them are easy to propagate. So what that means is a plant that you can take a cutting from, or you can, or it pups, or it has little babies that you can take and repot. Then you can share them, or you have more houseplants for yourself. Most of these have always been my tried and true plants that I've had. I've had all of these for quite a while. Yeah, I've had all of them for at least like 5 or 6 months, most of them 2 years or more. So I have a lot of experience with them. So I'm going to be leaving a few plants off this list. Like a lot of plant lists for beginners, they list things like ivy. I don't understand why. They're a little bit more finicky to me. They're more prone to pests, and I don't know, they just seem, they're better outdoor plants in my opinion. And I just don't have as good of luck with them indoors. So, you know, there's a few different plants I'm not really going to keep on this list. Kind of like spider plants. I definitely recommend them for everybody to at least try because they're incredible for propagating, and they just make you feel like a plant expert, you know, right away. Except the house that I'm living in right now, they're not doing as good. So I'm not having those on my list because they just seem to be not as good as I thought they were. So I have selected things that I know are just awesome and incredible and always perform really well for me. So pretty much all these plants you could leave for a month and they would be just fine, especially in the right conditions. If you like this video and you want me to do something on like other plants I would recommend but aren't necessarily my optimal for this video, things like I could talk about Christmas cactuses and you know, things like that. I also love pencil cactuses. There's all sorts of things. I'm thinking maybe my next one will be the best plants for propagating for beginners. I'm just kind of thinking that might be a good video idea. I'm going to start off with my favorite plant that I've had like pretty much ever since I got married about 6.5 years ago. My aunt gave me this angel wing begonia, and if you're familiar with my channel, you are familiar with this plant. I just love to rave about this plant all the time. So it has beautiful undersides to its leaves, and it's just shiny and beautiful. But the thing about this is in a gallon-sized plastic container that's inside this basket, and it's always been in this pot for as long as I know. As long as I've had it, like my aunt gave it to me in this pot, and it's always been in this pot. And basically I will give it either worm castings or just water from the fish tank, or I get buffalo. It's a buffalo compost. Like I use a tea and I like to water my plants with that, or I put the compost just directly on top of it. Sometimes I have used plant spikes to fertilize it, which I love plant spikes for low maintenance fertilizing. It's amazing. But I don't always do that, and I mean it's amazing. It's so happy. It's extremely lush. If anytime it gets leggy, I just cut it down. I pop the cuttings into my fish tank so that way it can propagate, and then I have extra cuttings that I can give to people. beautiful, and it's amazing. So the reason why I know that this plant can survive like anything is I kept this upstairs in my bedroom at our old house, our old house, and I forgot to water it all the time. I rarely remember to water it. I'd usually water about every month or more. My husband would water it with his water that, like, he'd bring up water for I could drink during the night, and whatever was left in his cup in the morning he'd give this pot. But he wouldn't always do that, and so I would be like, oh, I don't need to water that plant. He waters it for me. And then, you know, a month or two later, it's just completely just drooped down, and it's just like, oh, well, I should water that maybe. Then I wait a day or two, and then I finally water it, and then it's right back up and beautiful. So to me, this is a really easy plant to tell when it needs to be watered. I mean, you don't need to wait for it to be drooped down. You can water it before then, and it would be much happier, I'm sure. And these plants supposedly love humidity, but I don't keep mine where it's a lot of humidity at all. I live in a very dry climate. I will mist this maybe every few months whenever I feel like it to get some dust off the leaves, but that's it. And it's just an incredible plant. Like, if you live in a more humid climate, you might be able to get away with more with this plant than I even get away with. So I just think that they're amazing and incredible, and I love them. My other angel wing begonia is exactly the same way. I can't attest to other begonias because I've only had the ones that you would keep outside or whatever, and I'm not very good with those. So I love these ones. One that I'm gonna just mention is just a pothos. So, I mean, they're amazing. They're easy to propagate. Like, if you want to keep one of these, you can just stick it in some water and leave it growing in water for a while. Like, I've had one growing in water just for like a year and it was fine. So, they're easy to propagate. They're easy to grow. If they start getting leggy, you just trim them back. Use the cuttings to propagate them. You can, once they're rooted, you can put the cuttings in there and have more plants in there, so that way it's bushier. And but you can overwater them before you leave, and they'll be fine as long as you're not overwatering them constantly. Of course, that's the main problem with like killing plants usually. Just give them a really good soaking, then they'll be just fine for like probably even a couple months. In my experience anyways, they're just amazing. I really love them for keeping in my fish tank. They're one of those kinds of plants not inside the water, but like to where the roots are in the water, because they feed off of all that, and the fish like to go around the roots and everything. It kind of creates a little habitat for them. I want to mention this plant just really quickly. This is a shamrock. I need to take off some of these dead leaves, but if you leave this plant for too long without watering it, you'll come back and you'll think it's completely dead. But I've had some of these little roots. Like there's a little root ball inside at the bottom of these. You can see this. This is like the little root things in there. They don't always look exactly like this. They're just kind of a little weird. But I've actually thought that my shamrock has died before, other ones that I've had. The soil was still fine. I was using it for a plant that didn't need as much nutrients and stuff, and so I would just kind of mix it up with some other soil, and I reused the pot, and I just put another plant in there. And what happened was, after a while, this plant that I hadn't watered in months and I thought was completely dead, and I started getting shamrocks in with my other plant. So these plants are incredibly resilient. You can completely take off all the foliage basically, and then water them for a little while, and they'll come back and be beautiful and incredible. And they flower. It's one of my favorite parts about them, is that they flower. Mine flower all the time. And another thing with this is my son, when he was little, my mom's shamrock is on the floors even still. And what he would do is he would go and he'd dig around in there, and he'd have his little toy animals and he'd play in them. when he was really little, like, you know, 1.5 and 2 and maybe even younger. He was just crawling around and playing with his toys, and he'd just destroy that poor plant. And it's taken a little while, but it's never died, and it's gotten to where it's completely recovered now, like pretty much. And it just, these plants are so resilient that I wouldn't worry about them dying on me if I left them for a long time, or if I completely neglected them, even if they wouldn't necessarily look the best. So I didn't want to necessarily have this in here, but I decided I should because they are just so impossible to kill. In here, right next to me, I have my Ficus Elastica. So this rubber tree plant is, I've had it for quite a while, but what I love about it is that basically I have it a little ways from my window. I've had it pretty close to my window where it's gotten quite a bit of sun, and it was fine. But then I put it back a little farther away, and it's still fine. Like, it seems to be a pretty resilient plant. I've had it for like a year now, and it just grows. I've given it some plant spikes, and I water it. But this plant, I can water it really good, and then I can leave it for a long time. Especially since this pot that I have it in is ceramic. Oh boy. And it's nice and thick. And that, just it being ceramic and glazed on the outside makes it to where it holds in the water. So that way, if I'm going to be, like, I have to make sure that I don't overwater this plant because, because if it was in like a terracotta pot, it wouldn't be as happy. So I have to make sure that I don't overwater it, for sure. If it was like in a terracotta pot where it releases moisture, then I would need to water this plant more. Since I have it in a ceramic pot that's glazed, I have to make sure that I don't overwater it. But that also makes it to where, especially in the winter, once it's going kind of more dormant, I hardly have to water this plant at all. Last winter, I watered it like twice. And I didn't even need to water it that much. I just gave it a little bit of water just to make sure that the roots were still staying a little bit more moist and not drying out. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this one because it's just so easy, especially since it's in a nice big pot. But you don't have to, if your plant's little, don't put it in a way big pot or anything. It's just, you know, since it's a little bigger, it has a little bit more surface area. So whatever. Back here I have a bamboo plant, like a lucky bamboo. It's not as appealing looking. It's kind of old, but I just give it water once a week. But I've also left it for a couple months without, like, I watered it really good, just fill it up with water, and I've left it for a couple months without doing anything to it, and it was fine. So, you know, it's a cool plant, and it filters the air. It's just not as pretty. So something that I'm a little hesitant to recommend, but I do really like, are air plants. I can go about 2 weeks without watering these and they'll be okay. If you live in a place that's really nice and humid, then you could probably go like a month without having to water these. But for me, I have to at least mist them every week and then give them a good soaking at least every other week. If not more, just because they don't get very much moisture from the air at all. This is probably the hardiest plant that I have. These Aloe Hybrids, like I've seen them everywhere. They have like these, they're spiky out here, but they have really thick, hardy leaves. Way more than the aloe that you would use to treat like wounds or whatever. These ones, they propagate like crazy. They're always puffing, always. They really don't mind it if I overwater them, and they don't mind it if I underwater them. I can water these things a lot, and they are just fine. As long as there's a little drain area for them. And this is in, you know, it's glazed. It's just fine. Ugh. I don't actually have one of these in a terracotta pot for it to breathe. They're all just, one of my one of these isn't even in a pot with drainage, and it's like has all this extra room for, yeah, it would not be a good situation for any other plant probably, but these do great. They are so hardy, they're so tough, they can withstand anything. I'd probably say that these, my pothos and my angel wing begonias and my clovers can handle anything basically that I throw at them. If I feel like overwatering for a while for whatever strange reason, they don't budge. If I feel like underwatering for a while, these don't do anything. They don't care. The other ones, you know, they might be like, what are you trying to do? Can you give us a little bit of water, please? Just a little bit? But they all will come out of whatever I do to them, and they'll be just fine. I love these Aloe Hybrids so much. They're phenomenal. So I wanted to mention jade plants. The typical jades that you see, I haven't had as good of luck with those. But these ogre ears, on the other hand, are amazing. They do just great. And they're succulent, of course, so they'll be fine for like a month or whatever. But, so these are also a spoon jade too, or ogre ears, whatever you want to call them. I just make sure that I don't water it like crazy. Although I do actually give it a good soaking probably every week sometimes. And then sometimes I forget to water them and they don't get watered for a couple weeks and they're just fine. Now, if they do get stressed, they will get a little bit of coloring on the outside right here, which, you know, you might actually want that sometimes. It's kind of cool when you can do that. So to achieve that, you can just like repot it sometimes, or, you know, you just have to try fiddle around with it and see what you can get. But I have been extremely pleased with these spoon jades. Out of all the jades that I have tried, I like spoon jades the best. So my last plant category is going to be my Sansevierias. So I have 3 kinds of Sansevierias. Well, 2 of them are just variegated Sansevierias, and the other one is a bird's nest Sansevieria. Sansevierias, typical. Just make sure you don't overwater them. If you're going to be leaving for a long time, have it in a plastic or a ceramic pot that's glazed. But if you're worried about overwatering them, if you really like to overwater your plants, make sure it's in a terracotta pot. And you can tell when it needs to be watered is the outside of this will be dry. Then it's probably pretty safe to water them. You can also put if you have a hole at the bottom, and you're not too worried about dirt getting everywhere, you can put your finger in the bottom to see how moist it is. If it's just a little tiny bit damp, then you're okay to water it. If it's still pretty wet, don't water it. That's a trick that I actually really like to do with these kinds of plants, just because I want to make sure that the roots stay moist enough, but that they don't dry out completely. But I also want to make sure that I don't overwater them. So when they're in this kind of pot, I like to check on them a little bit more. However, the one that's in like my plastic pot, when they're in plastic containers, like, you can, if you give them like a good amount of water, you want to make sure that you don't water it for at least a month probably, at least, because if it's not, they don't take up that much water, and if you water it too much, what's going to happen is their leaves are going to start turning yellow, and they're going to get squishy, and they're going to be really gross. But I've had mine come out of that before when I was just like watering them willy-nilly, but it was just fine afterwards. Okay, so this is my bird's nest Sansevieria. Why I like this one so much, I actually might prefer this over regular Sansevierias just because you can put them anywhere and they filter the air. They're rhizomal. They're like irises where they put out another plant, shoot off to the side, and the plant comes out. So with the bird's nest Sansevierias, they're not going to get very big, and so they pup, and you can take those pups and you go, like this one has so many pups, and I should probably take them out, but I really like them together right now. And so they grow in this circle shape, and they don't get huge, they don't get tall like the other ones, and so you can really just put it anywhere, and as long as it's not too much light. They don't like too bright of light. I've had them in pretty bright light before, and it was okay. I mean, actually it was just fine. It was in a southeast window, and it was just fine. I don't know why, it was. All my plants though were really happy where I had them over in that area before. Oh, and also with these, they don't mind being root bound. So another thing that I like about these, the Aloe Hybrids and the bamboo, the ficuses and the clover and oh, I didn't talk about my umbrella tree. The umbrella tree and the pothos and the angel wing begonias. None of those care really if you repot them regularly at all. I mean, most of them like, so the tree kinds of plants, the ficuses and this umbrella tree, it just goes, it's amazing. But I've had it in bright, like direct sunlight, and I've had it in very indirect sunlight, and it's been fine both times. It prefers bright indirect sunlight, but it's been fine wherever I put it. It doesn't really seem to care how much water I give it either. But, so I'm going to show you with this one an example. Alright, so can you kind of get the gist of how tall this plant is? And then look how tiny this pot is. We got this as a housewarming gift, and it was maybe about up to here-ish. It's grown like twice as tall now, but it's been in the same pot the whole time, and it could care less. It's just perfectly fine. So with tree plants, the thing about them is that if you keep them in a smaller container, they just won't get huge. You don't have to keep repotting them. If you want to repot them into something else, like a bigger pot, then it'll just get bigger. So you just keep that in mind that, you know, if your tree plant its growth is stunted, you could try putting it in a bigger pot. But if you don't want to get too huge, then try to keep it in a smaller pot. That doesn't necessarily guarantee it's not going to get huge, but it will more than likely help a lot. All of these plants will be just fine in whatever kind of pot you put them in, and they will be fine not being repotted, especially the air plants. I mean, all of these plants that I've shown you today can be overwatered for a little while. Once you see them being overwatered, just make sure you step it way back and don't give them any water for a while. I mean, you don't want their roots to rot, but get a little bit of time before you kill them. Overwatering is the best way to kill plants, of course, but say you're new to plants and you don't know squat, you don't know diddly about any of this, then if you kill a plant from overwatering one of these kinds of plants and you learn your mistake, then you go back and you're like, okay, I'm not going to overwater these, and you neglect it severely without watering it, then it'll be fine for the most part. So all of these plants I think are really good for new plant people, because a lot of them are actually plants that I've had. I was getting into plants. They were kind of newer plants for me, and they were pretty easy. I mean, clearly I couldn't kill them. It wasn't until I started getting really into plants that I started wanting to overwater them, and because I was babying them too much. And then I was like, okay, what is wrong with this plant? And then I just looked it up and I was overwatering it, and that was it. Well, that's why I'm recommending these, because they're really good beginner plants for me. And I want you to have the best success that you can. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments about these plants, then please don't hesitate to put them in the comment section below, and we can have a chat. I'll talk to you guys next week. Bye!